Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode one of our Age of Empires tutorial series. In this episode, we're just going to be talking about hotkey setup and unit production. We're really talking about the essential hotkeys that you need to know, basic unit production, and then lastly, we're going to talk about kind of your kind of more nuanced details about why we use these and how to use them. Looking at it right now, we're going to just go over some of the basic aspects of this hotkey screen. Hotkeys are very important in any RTS. In most games, actually, hotkeys can play a fundamental role in improving the efficiency through which you interact with the game. Age of Empires 1 is no exception to that, maybe even more so. I would classify Age of Empires as a micro-intensive RTS, so macro is really important in this game, but micro takes up a lot of your attention, your mental awareness, and also your mouse and hand control, like your how you interact with the game. A lot of it is dealing with the micro aspects of the game. So eking out little bits of efficiency through use of hotkeys is extremely important if you want to be competitive in the game. Now, that being said, we can jump into this. So first, there's a lot to decompress here, so excuse kind of the list of things that we're about to talk about. First, there's the classic hotkeys and the grid hotkeys. Classic refers to the original game's hotkeys. If you're new to the game, I don't recommend this. Grid is going to feel a lot more logical. If you have been using classic hotkeys for a long time, then feel free to, keep practicing with them. It's obviously not impossible. A lot of expert players do use it, but for learning purposes, I think grid is far more useful. I personally use the grid hotkeys. There's only one hotkey that I highly recommend changing for both classic and reset grid, and that's going to be under game commands. You can go to next idle villager. It's initially going to be period key on your keyboard. 100% recommend changing that to something on the left side of the keyboard if you're using the grid setup. I use tab. Yes, it does overlap with cycle selection forward, but it's always going to take, if you have nothing selected, you go to the next idle villager. If you have things selected, you're going to cycle. It's weird how it interacts, but it's really not important. Cycling selections forward and backward is kind of a niche thing. You don't really need that, I would say. That being said, other than this, the build button, essentially, when you're selecting a villager, I guess it's a game command. Where is this one? I don't even know. Unit commands, a build here. It essentially just gets rid of the second click. So instead of having to select a villager, press your build button, which in classic would be B, in grid it's Q. You hit Q, and then to build the building that you want, you then press another hotkey. I personally prefer to have it off of that. I know many people, again, many experts who use the build button from familiarity, but without it, it saves you a click on the keyboard, and I think that's more important than, familiarity. I learned it this way from the get-go of this button being introduced. I said this is a huge lifesaver, so I'm going to use it. It makes quick walling easier. It makes a whole host of things a little bit easier. Now, that being said, internalize a majority of these. You're going to need to know the villager builds for house, granary, dock, barracks, market, stonewall, extremely important. Tower, farm, very much so used a lot. The range is important. Stable. Temple, you could get away with not. I mean, town center, I guess. There are a couple. These ones down here. Storage pit, really important. Academy, probably pretty important to know. If you need practice learning these, I would suggest just go into a game and learn one before the game. And then say, no matter what, I'm not going to let myself click that hotkey. I think that's a great way to just get yourself introduced. Instead of clicking it, you're going to use that hotkey. You're going to force yourself to remember, even at the detriment of the game itself. You're going to be like, okay, I cannot click on the bottom left grid thing. I have to do that. So the way the grid works is it corresponds with the bottom left here. We'll go back into our game here. When you're selecting a villager, you'll see on the bottom left, your options for what to build are in a grid. And same with the units here. They're on a grid style format. When you have grid hotkeys, your keyboard lines up with where these align on the grid, starting at the top left being Q and going across, right? So house is Q, barracks is W, granary is E, storage pits R, etc., etc. And then range is A, S, D, right, as you continue. Same with the barracks. So it kind of makes for a very natural style of gameplay that I highly recommend. So with regards to your unit production, using hotkeys can be hugely to your advantage. Now, inside of hotkeys, there is another little nuance. It's that your go-to commands under your game commands. So there's go to town center, and there is go to barracks, range, stable. You'll notice that these do not align with the grid. I recommend changing these. I can't do that at this point because I'm just way too ingrained with this. I wasn't able to do this. I might do this in the near future, but that's not for this conversation here. But learn these as well. These are probably the most important if you're not comfortable using control groups. We'll talk about control groups in another video here. So we have our unit production is going to be out of these buildings, so going to the buildings quickly without having to flounder about the map is going to really speed up your gameplay. So I can demonstrate that here. Now, first, it's going to be in the town center producing villagers, right? When you make a vill, you just press Q. You don't have to send your stuff over here. You're going to be doing this all game, and the efficiency behind doing that is extremely, extremely important, right? You don't want to have to constantly be sending your mouse all the way to the bottom left of your screen to click that button. You'll notice I'm just on like a deathmatch style game here, so ignore the economy of it all. We're just talking about the basics. So when you're off onto the map, say looking at this army, for example, and you want to make a villager, the best way to do it is to remember go to town centers H and then produce villagers Q. When you have multiple town centers, it cycles through every time you press H, and then it's just a simple aspect of pressing Q. This is a very, very important skill to have mastered. I highly recommend also, if you aren't familiar, you want to turn on global Q. That's going to give you this the green bars up there dictating what units are being produced. Very useful. But that being said, you want to be able to do this. Cycling between your town centers is extremely important. And I just accomplished that by tapping H. That's both in Classic and Grid. And then Grid hotkeys, you'd be pressing Q to create. In Classic, you'd be pressing C. Just because that orients you with the normal thing. The next most important hotkey after villager production is idle villagers. Your economy is idling. If you look up at the top left here, you'll see that I have 10 villagers idle. I have some ships here that I've idled, and I changed that to tab, as I said at the very beginning of the video. Change that to tab, or to something closer to where you're comfortable with. I personally believe that it's very hard to keep reaching for the period key. It's far away, it's awkward, your hand's at the left of the keyboard. Keep it at tab here. And when you reach for it, it's going to cycle between. And then you'll realize you had some idle vills over down at the bottom right side of the map, or the bottom of the map. And coming back to our town, we could talk about unit production now, beyond villagers. So we've covered how to cycle your TCs and create vills. Next would be the go-to commands for the other buildings, which are, by default, Control D for your docks. And that is just going to cycle between your docks. What you do then is up to you. If you're going to keep booming with eco, you're going to press, Q for fishing boat if you're on the grid like I am. I'm going to keep referencing hotkeys from the grid standpoint because I believe that's better for a newer player to learn from. So you're going to press Q at each of your things, and, I'm just pressing Control D, lifting, then Q. Control D, Q. Control D, Q. And that's essentially the concept behind cycling your any building. And you can learn that pretty quickly over time. It might take some time to learn all the controls. Like, so if I wanted to go to B and I want to make slingers, it's Control B, E, Control B, E, Control B, E. And you can obviously speed that up with practice, That's how you cycle between your buildings to create units. And that's going to be extremely important. Another thing is setting the rally point so that they all meet up at the same spot by simply right-clicking out of your barracks. Furthermore, you can go to your stables and, Control L. I don't know, elephants would be R here. So I just cycled Control L, Control L, Control L, and then R at each one. Right? And that's how you produce your units there. And that's kind of the basics of, cycling between your different building styles. If you need to learn them. Again, this isn't about teaching you individual hotkeys. It's more about the premise about it. You can see them all here under go-to commands, and these are extremely important. However, as the kind of the ending of this video, so now you've learned the efficient way to use hotkeys to make units. We're going to talk about control groups really quick and how you can use that to your advantage. So in combat, you're almost always going to have your combat units to some sort of hotkey early on. This is really important. We'll talk about this more in another video, kind of functioning detailing the functions of hotkeys specifically. But with regards to hotkeys, say that control group 2, which you accomplish by highlighting some units and hitting control 2, is my cavalry. And I'm currently in a really intense fight, right? I really got to focus on this fight. You've zoomed in, you're microing each one. You don't want them to get, clumped up or shot down or hit by catapults or something, but you want to keep producing units out of your stables, right? And you'll notice that when you hit Control L, it centers your screen on that building, right? And that it's cycling to. What you can do to further improve the efficiency of your unit production is to hotkey your buildings as well, right? So now I have 2 is go to my if I double tap 2, it goes to my my cav out here. If I double tap 3, it goes to my stables. Now something that also allows is when I'm on 2 and I just single tap 3 for the stables, notice I no longer send my my screen didn't get centered on the stables when you only single tap a building hotkey, or any hotkey of that matter, right? If I'm on the stables and I only single tap 2, I could send my cavalry to reinforce here without even looking. I know that my cavalry are now making their way to the map because I selected 2 and I right-clicked. What you can do with this is in combat, if you don't want to move your screen around to disorient you, or if the fight is really important, you can simply press 3 here and tap. I'm now going to press W to produce some scythe chariots here. And you'll notice that at each of my stables now, I have queued up a scythe. And this is accomplished by just pressing it multiple times. It'll automatically evenly distribute amongst the available stables. So if you look at the top left, every time I press W, it's going to add 1 to that counter, right? Evenly across them. Same with barracks. If I cycled these as my control 2, and I was like, I want to make a bunch of axemen, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and wire. There you go. 1 at each of them. And if you hold shift, it queues up 5. If you really need to mass produce, right? It's going to add 1 at each, and that's also evenly distributed. So now you know 2 different ways to create units quickly and efficiently. A lot of times in early situations, you don't want to be looking at your barracks in order to be producing units, and that's just going to help you, or your stables rather, and that's why you set control groups for your buildings. Or if you have too many, or if you're not comfortable with that, you should certainly know how to cycle between the primary military buildings, like your dock, your barracks, your stable. I don't have them built here, but your academy is Control X. Your other stuff. We can talk about that, and you can obviously go into your game settings, hotkeys, and look at that at any time you want. And remember, these are the important ones. We've gone over what they are. The grid is the easiest way to learn, and for economy usage, you should always be pressing this frequently, right? You should always be queuing up Vils, and then the final most important hotkey is pressing Tab. Literally at any moment you have downtime and giving your units something to do. This is just idle economic units. I still have comma as my idle military unit. And that's just going to cycle between them all like crazy if you hold it down. Same with Tab, it's going to cycle between. very fast. Same with H. It's going to cycle between your TCs if you hold it down. And so I hope that explains kind of, if you're watching, you know, a pro player play and you see them just going crazy everywhere, and this is how they maintain production. It's extremely important to keep the efficiency up of all your buildings. You don't want buildings that aren't doing anything, except for specific situations, obviously, right? You don't want your town center idled ever. So, you know, you're microing your cav, and you're just like, oh, but I need to keep building villas. There, did it. I just queued up 3 more villas that quickly, and that's going to keep you at a competitive level, like, ahead of the game. It's going to let you focus on what's important, which is the combat, while also maintaining production from your buildings. Hope that helps, and welcome to the series. So if you're new here, this is the first video. We're going to be going through a whole host of topics, ranging from beginner, which is the starting stuff, all the way up to the advanced techniques, tips, tricks, all of that. So thank you, and I hope you keep up with the progress here. We're going to be releasing videos very quickly here, so thank you all, and welcome.